Well, hello, everybody, wherever you may be this Friday. And once again, thank you very much for tuning in and being part of this experience with me. For those of you that haven't viewed one of these Frank Fridays before, if I may, let me tell you again the origin of this whole series. Ryan asked me maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago if I would be willing to make a series of YouTube videos for him that he very graciously named after me. I'm Frank, his father, and I thought that would be a good idea. I thought it would really be nice for me to have an avenue to reach out to interested parties and supplement Ryan's story by letting people know what I and Diane's mom, Diane, went through during these many, many years of turmoil that Ryan went through. So I was very happy to do it. And now that we have 4 in the books already, it's been a great surprise to me, the tremendous response that my series has generated. I would have never imagined it at all. There's a series of comments that are attached to every presentation, and over 4 presentations were probably over about 1,100 different comments that people have made. And if you made comments in the past and you're tuned into this particular episode, rest assured that I've read your comments because I read each and every one. And I've been pleasantly surprised, shocked, and humbled, actually, by the tremendously positive, kind comments that people have made over and over again. I've heard that it helps them better understand what perhaps their families have gone through, and that my perspective is a good adjunct to everything that Ryan has shared about his experiences with addiction and incarceration and all sorts of other things associated with both of those. So that's really my background there. And I've also really learned, and it's been a great revelation to me, the tremendous power of the medium, the power of YouTube to give people opportunities to zero in on subtopics that they're very interested in learning more about. And 5 weeks ago, I thought it was just another social media piece of the pie. And now I really feel that it's ultimately the future of social media. That I personally, from what I've seen, think that YouTube is going to supersede cable TV as we know it as the primary vehicle for people not only in this country but throughout the world getting the information that they desire. So it's been a great experience for me so far, and I am flattered, humbled that so many people seem to be enjoying the experience. So thank you very, very much. There's one question that somebody asked during the comments, and I know that I really can't answer questions because there could be too many. It would take up all the time. But there was one question that I do want to respond to. Somebody, after one of the earlier episodes, asked if there was a family history of addiction preceding Ryan. And the answer is not directly. You have to go back a couple generations to find such a history. But indeed, there is. In my case, I'm good for a couple glasses of wine a month. Diane, Ryan's mom, hardly drinks at all. If she has one drink, that's more than enough. All 4 of Ryan's grandparents were moderate drinkers, and certainly none of us were significantly involved in drugs by any means. So you really have to go back a couple generations. I believe there was a relative, it may have been a grandfather or a great-grandfather on Ryan's side that had some issues in that regard, but it was probably so long ago that addiction wasn't as mainstream and as focused as it is nowadays. So I think it's important, my point of view there is, I think it's important to understand that family history can be predictive of addictive behavior, but what I've learned is that there's a lot of addicts that don't have any family history, and there's a lot of people with family histories that don't have any addictions. So although it can help predispose somebody toward that end, it's by no means universal, not even close. At least that's been my experience. So in any event, going back to where I left off last time, and I think we were at the end of 2005, I'd like to backtrack just a little bit to something else very significant that happened in my life as a parent early in 2005. At the time, you may remember Ryan was at the Watershed Rehabilitation Program in the Boca Raton area of Florida. And I frequently spoke to people on the staff there by telephone to get updates on how he was doing. And there was one woman, and I say this admirably, who was the ultimate Jersey girl. And like so many people in these rehab facilities, she too was a former addict. She was in recovery, so she had been there, done that, and I think it was very insightful. And my conversations with her were certainly helpful and opened my eyes to a lot of things. And in one of our conversations, she was just calmly talking, and then all of a sudden she got very emotional and said, "Listen, I want you to understand this. Ryan could die." And of course, I knew that. But hearing that from a professional that's working with him every day was very sobering, if you excuse the pun there. And then she said, "What I would suggest that you do is go to an Al-Anon meeting." Well, at that point, I didn't know what Al-Anon was. I thought Al-Anon was just an abbreviation for Alcoholics Anonymous. That shows how silly I was. But I remember exactly what she said. She said, "Go to just one meeting and it will bring you to your knees." Well, if there's such a thing as a person that's not likely to ever go to a 12-step program and then return a second time, that would be me. If you go back, a lot of you probably in high school had these awards, most likely to succeed, most likely to run a company. Well, if there was an award in my high school class for most likely to never attend a 12-step meeting, I would have won that going away. I'm just not a 12-step meeting kind of person, not a person that particularly enjoys being in a fellowship of equal and sitting around in a circle. So I went more out of curiosity than with any long-term ambition to be part of the program. And this was May 27th, 2005. And Ryan was at Watershed at the time and struggling mightily, and had been struggling for the years preceding it. And I went to the meeting, and I left, and I thought maybe I'll go back and maybe I won't. And now here it is 14 years later, and I've been to approximately 2,000 Al-Anon meetings, not just the first one, which is a great shock to me. And not only that, but I really got actively involved. There's a position in Al-Anon called a district representative, which is the person that basically coordinates what's going on in a district. And our district was the greater Santa Barbara area that extended a few towns in either direction, and covered about 25 or 26 different meetings a week. So it was a pretty active district that we were part of, and I was the person that was primarily responsible for coordinating it for 3 years, a little bit further down the road, 2011 to 2013. But the reason I wanted to include this at the outset of the 5th episode of Frank Fridays is that I learned an awful lot of very, very vital information by my involvement in Al-Anon, and I wanted to mention those briefly. The first is that I learned, and it's so critically important, that addiction is a disease. It's not a choice of a bad habit. It's a disease, and I think you have to understand it that way. And the more I came to understand it that way, the more I understood what I could do and what I could not do in support of Ryan, and the more I really appreciated and understood what Ryan was going through. So that was the first thing, and it's something that I believe deeply to this day, and I think that belief really helps me be a supportive parent, a supportive loved one. The second is there's something called the 3 C's of Al-Anon. You may have heard this somewhere along the way, but it's so critically true, and not following the 3 C's is such an easy way to fall into terrible traps. And the 3 C's of Al-Anon is, number one, that I didn't cause it. And it's very, very easy for a loved one, whether it's a parent, whether it's a spouse or a significant other, whether it's a child. It's very easy to feel that ultimately you were the cause of the addiction. That, gee, if I hadn't yelled at Ryan back when he was in 4th grade, he might not have gone through this. Or if I didn't travel as much as I did professionally, which I did for many, many years, if he had had his father home 7 nights a week instead of 5 nights a week, maybe things would have been different. But I really learned that it is not something that I should feel any responsibility or guilt for. So that's the first C, the cause. The second C is you can't control it. And God knows from the time that Ryan fell into this addiction in late 2000 until I got into Al-Anon in mid 2005, it was my intent that I could control it. I could even cure it. That's how my whole life had been. You know, people have a problem, jump on my back, jump on Frank's back. I'll take you to the top of the mountain and we'll get this cleared up. And I tried everything from throwing money at it to sending to rehab to having heart-to-heart talks to tough love to genuine affection, whatever the case may be. And I finally came to a tranquility and acceptance that I could not control it, nor the third C, I certainly could not cure it. Ultimately, it's up to the addict himself when they find it within themselves, however that may be, in order to get into recovery from the addiction that they're dealing with. And there's no one way to do it. That's something else I've really learned, that some people do it cold turkey. Some people do it through 12-step programs such as Narcotics Anonymous or Alcoholics Anonymous. Some people do it through rehab programs. People do it just strictly through strong sponsorship relationships. Some people do it through a relationship or a combination of many of those things. So there's no one way out of it. And I think the thing that I probably learned more than anything else is the time has got to come. You got to be ready for it. And loved ones that care about the addict can't do very, very much about when that time is going to be. So I think that's an issue as well. Two other quick things, and then I'll move on to the current year. One is something I really loved out of the program, and it was a real lesson to me, was the extraordinary camaraderie of being with other people that were dealing with similar problems. And I found that being part of the program, more or less, I really was attracted to people that were parents of children with the same issues. Somehow we sort of bonded and found one another, and that was enormously helpful. To this day, there's probably 10 or 12 people that I've known through the program that I would consider to be extremely close friends, that we stay in touch, we text, we call, and we have lunch, we have breakfast, and we have this common bond to begin with. So the camaraderie was very important. And then the last thing that was very important to me was the whole notion of service and serving others and caring for others. And I thought that I had done a lot of that in my life, but I really hadn't. And when I did that 3-year stint, and some years preceding it, I was active doing other things, and even afterwards I was active doing various things, I really learned the enormous satisfaction that comes with working with other people and serving other people. And I don't think I would have ever said this if it wasn't for having gone through this situation. But the one thing that I really learned in life is that perhaps the most important thing that anybody can do is ultimately to give to others. You know, it's sort of a cliche. You hear that all the time. I went an awful long time in my life before I came to a genuine appreciation of the truth of that. But it's really true. And there's something, and during all of Ryan's incarceration years and during all of Ryan's rehabilitation years, one thing that turned out to be a real opportunity was that I was able to write him a lot. And he was able to actually sit and read what I was writing. If you're doing normal parroting, everybody's sort of on the run and you don't have a chance to share your thoughts as deeply as you do when you're writing letters virtually every day, as I did during many, many, many years. And there's something that I told Ryan over and over again, that my only wish for him, what I wanted from him as a father, was twofold. One is I wanted him to be happy, that we all go around once. I'm getting older. I mean, that one time is getting closer to an end, and I'm really realizing how critically important it is to just absolutely embrace every day and be happy. Just enjoy your life, laugh, have fun, no matter what. And that's one of the two things that I wanted out of Ryan as my child, my only child. And the other is to be a good citizen. And that's really translated to actually reaching out and giving yourself to others and not simply dealing with yourself and your own gratification. So that was my Al-Anon experience, and it was a life changer. and most unanticipated life changer. And I might finally add that sometimes the darkest things in life, the darkest moments in life, this very, very challenging, difficult, many years, 18, 19 years period of dealing with Ryan's issues, had a lot of silver linings as well. Growing as a person, understanding the value of life, and really growing the relationship between a father and a son, or a parent and a son. His mom, I don't want to minimize her attachment and involvement as well. So anyhow, we're going back now. I've used half the session to sort of talk about that dramatic period in early 2005. But in the last session, we talked about the year 2005, how he got kicked out of Watershed and got in trouble and had to serve some time in Florida and had to go back to California and finally finish his time in the Santa Barbara County Jail, and how 2005 was just a dreadful period of time. But if we go into 2006, beginning of 2006, now Ryan is home. He's done with his term at the Santa Barbara County Jail. He's back from Florida, and he has his high school degree, he has his GED that he had gotten in Utah. So the question arises, what is next? We tried the gap year program in Massachusetts, and as we discussed in earlier sessions, that didn't work out real well. So what to do? Well, we came up with this idea, maybe we'll send him out of town. We didn't want him in Santa Barbara, too many bad influences here, and I think Ryan himself frequently cited that as well, that there's too much familiar stuff going on in his hometown, probably best for him to leave. And as parents, we felt that we could probably be more supportive if we were 100 or 200 miles away. So we chose Monterey, which is up the coast, about a 4-hour drive from Santa Barbara, and told Ryan that we'll enroll him and, of course, pay all the expenses for him to go to junior college up there. So we, in fact, did that. Ryan, in that January of 2006, he and I got some furniture and put it on a U-Haul van, and a couple of weeks before that, Diane and I went up and found a nice place for him, but basically a studio apartment in a nice complex within walking distance of the city, of the community college, Monterey, I think it's called Monterey Peninsula Community College. And I brought Ryan up there, and I was a little bit uneasy. I remember we stopped at a place to eat along the way, and Ryan just didn't sound like he was even mildly interested in doing any academic work. And I remember I was really shook up, and I think it showed in my facial expression, and Ryan noticed it, and I almost thought, well, maybe it's good for him to see a little pain in his father. Maybe that'll help. So we dropped Ryan off there, and he starts on his way, and of course we have no idea what's going on. We're hopeful that everything is going well, and of course the reports we get back from Ryan is that he's attending class and he's making some progress, and we can only hope for the best. And he hooked up with an old friend. He did have one friend that both we as our family, his parents, and Ryan really cared for a lot, and he was able to hook up with him up in Monterey to some degree. And then we get into March, and the exact date is March 17th, 2006. And I am in Chicago on business. It's a Friday, and I am done, but I'm staying over Friday night to go out to dinner with some professional colleagues before I take a plane back to Santa Barbara on Saturday morning. And don't forget, it's St. Patrick's night in Chicago. If there's ever a city that celebrates St. Patrick's Day, I guess Boston and New York would be in there as well. It's Chicago, so it was really a fun night to go out to town. But the previous night, both Diane and I tried to call Ryan, and there was no answer, and he didn't return our calls when we left a voicemail, and he had a cell phone at that point. And we tried again Friday morning, then we tried again as we got into midday. He kept on saying, Ryan, we're really worried. Call us. We're worried about you. And he didn't call back. So I was very, very concerned. Now, fortunately, I had a professional colleague, a fellow named Bill, a great guy, a former U.S. Marine, was the president of a successful company up there, and a professional colleague of mine. We were good friends. And he was based in Monterey. His company was based in Monterey. So in Chicago, I called and said, Bill, you got to help me out. I'm gonna cancel my appointment tonight. I'm gonna go right out to O'Hare. As being a Friday night, there was no seats available, but I'm gonna fly standby to try to get back to California. because I'm really concerned about this. But in the meantime, here's Ryan's address. Please, please, please go over there, knock on the door, somehow get in there. I did not want to get the management of the complex involved for fear that they might go in and find something that would get Ryan in trouble. And clearly I didn't want to get authorities involved just yet. So thankfully I had Bill to go and run a little bit of interference for me. Unfortunately, Bill didn't go right away. It took him several hours before he went, and I was waiting, and I called back Bill a couple times and left voicemails. Bill, I'm really getting nervous. I'm going to take the cab out to the airport momentarily and head back, and so forth. Get out to the airport, get on about an 8 p.m. flight, 8 p.m. in Chicago, 6 p.m. in California. And I'm walking down the, what are they called, the galleyway, or I'm not sure what they're called, but just before you enter into the plane, and 1 yard before I step into the plane, and shortly after that I would have not been able to find out anything by phone until 4 hours later when the plane landed, in this case in LA. That's where my car was parked for this particular trip. And Bill calls. And he says, well, I finally got over to Ryan's place. I got in, the door was unlocked, and he was sleeping, and there was just syringes all over the place. And Bill is God bless him, very, very straight, conservative guy, and the sight of needles was just horrifying to him. But for me, hearing Ryan was alive it was like this huge weight was taken off my shoulders. Thank God. So I said, Bill, is he okay to be left alone? And he said, yeah, Ryan's fine. I think I even got on the phone with Ryan at that point. It was all very brief because I was walking into my seat and throwing my bag in the overhead and trying to talk on the phone. And I told Ryan, listen, we're coming up. I'm in Chicago now. I'll be home in LA in a short period of time. So indeed, got to LA, got in my car, drove up here. By the time I got back to Santa Barbara, it was closer to midnight. At night, and I was exhausted. I had had a long trip to Chicago all week long, so I took a little nap for a few hours, and we got up probably about 4:30 in the morning, and got in the car and started our drive up to Monterey. We got up there. Ryan was there, and he was alive, and I wouldn't call him well, but he was alive, and we told him we got to do something about this. This is we got to do it. And we agreed right there that Ryan would apply to go back to Watershed. And this was late on a Friday night. This was early on a Saturday morning, about 8 or 8:30 Saturday morning. So we got him out of that apartment. We went to a hotel in downtown Monterey, the Monterey Marriott, and I got on the phone with Watershed, and even though he had been kicked out, they were willing to take him back. And we got a plane flight for him, I believe, the next day. And we stayed at that hotel. And I remember he told me about midnight or so that he wanted to take a walk or go down to the lobby or smoke a cigarette or something like that. And I said, okay. And then all of a sudden, half an hour goes by and I said, oh my God, God knows, he's skipping out of this. Went down and sure enough, he's in the lobby just shooting the bull with somebody, and got him back to the room and got him on the airplane the next day. And Ryan goes back to Watershed. And of course he gets in trouble again the second time around in Watershed. And I get a phone call maybe a month later, I'm thinking maybe April of 2006. And they say that, we may have to drop Ryan out of the program. And they say, well, may I come to Florida and discuss this with you? Because I was petrified that Ryan being kicked out on the street is a hazard to his life. It's a threat to his life. In Watershed, hopefully his behavior can settle down a little bit, even though he didn't seem to want to be there, and we could get by that. So I did go, and by some miracle, I talked Ryan's way into staying, and he was okay for a while. And then he was basically detoxing. So by the time he got done with the detox, he wanted to come back, and I don't remember exactly why, but was going to come back to California. We found a place in Orange County called Cornerstone, and of all the rehab places I've dealt with, that's the one that I personally, as a parent, liked the best. It was started by a physician who himself had had significant addiction problems. And I remember speaking with him on the phone, and I thought that he had more insight than anybody else that I had spoken with along the way regarding Ryan's condition, the dual diagnosis issues of other things maybe helping to drive the addiction and the addiction itself. So Ryan was there in Cornerstone for a short period of time. And then I believe it was 3 or 4 weeks later, maybe 5, 6 weeks, somewhere in that vein, we're getting into, say, June of 2006, we hear from Cornerstone that Ryan left, and that somehow he got himself, I believe he got himself on a bus and was coming back to Santa Barbara. And I said, oh no. And actually, ironically, it may have been Memorial Day weekend. It may have been my first anniversary of my Al-Anon experience, and I was going into an Al-Anon meeting when I found this out, which is probably a good place to be going. At least I had some comfort that first hour after I found out that once again Ryan was walking from help. And looking back on it now is just sort of all part of the addictive behavior and the pressures that he was going through. It wasn't entirely a lifestyle decision. It was to some degree, but not entirely. So Ryan did come back to Santa Barbara, and I believe initially our stance was, Ryan, you are not going to stay at the house. You can't just leave a place and expect to come home and get 3 meals a day and have your own bed and so forth. So we found some other avenue, some other place to stay for a while, and then over time came back and we had him at the house for a while and started a period where there were some good things and some bad things. So in any event, this brings us midways to through 2006, and I'm going to end this session here and pick it up at that point on the next episode of Frank Fridays. And thank you for being part of it again. I appreciate it.
Palabra.